Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. As you see, I'm on the road for work, but we got to talk more about Russell Wilson and the situation with the Steelers. Are there too many distraction problems with Russell Wilson coming to Pittsburgh? Is that a mistake that's being overlooked? We'll talk about that with Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com, who wrote about this for SteelersNow.com, as well as several other positive and negatives of Russell Wilson coming to Pittsburgh and free agency. It's an action-packed episode here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the number one sportsbook in America. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I said before, we're joined by Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Now, as y'all see, I'm not in my normal setup. I'm kind of doing guerrilla podcasting here on the road. I'm covering the ACC tournament with my partner, Noah Hiles from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we're going to be doing that this week. But while we're here, we're still talking Steelers here on Locked On Steelers. Alan, you wrote a very interesting piece about Russell Wilson going into this weekend on SteelersNow.com about the rumors of the rumored drawbacks of Russell Wilson were the tensions that were in the locker rooms of both Seattle and Denver. And this was something even I brought up. I said, we've seen Richard Sherman and Marshawn Lynch and guys from the Legion of Boom era go on podcasts and kind of not speak too highly of Russell Wilson and blame him for some faults that kind of broke up the team. Then we've seen Broncos arguing on the sideline with Russell Wilson. We saw things not work out with Nathaniel Hackett, Sean Payton obviously having rifts with him. And a lot of people, I think, legit reasonably wondered, that those who, that's all you get to see, is Russell Wilson a problem? Is he divisive? And you wrote a story that was kind of like, that was a little overblown. What were the things that you found?
So I went to Indy at the Combine to see if the Steelers were going to be interested in Russell Wilson. And I didn't really get the scoop there. But I did ask a lot of people about Russell Wilson, and I think I learned some things. One of the things I learned from people that were in Denver was that the sort of like everything that happened in Denver, they felt like got overblown. It was stuff that was happening that was like the parking spot thing and the office thing. And there was like a thread of drama that like went through it all, but like that was a thing that happened within the media and within the fan base, but it wasn't really a thing in the locker room. Like guys weren't really upset about this stuff. Like, yeah, maybe there was somebody somewhere said something, but like the majority of the people in the locker room didn't think anything of this. And then, the fit between him and Sean Payton was very much a clash of personalities. It was very much oil and water, but it wasn't necessarily because either guy was wrong or that they couldn't be like good on their own. It was just a bad marriage. It was two guys that didn't see the game the same way, didn't really see eye to eye. And there was like some trust that broke down in that process early on, and things kind of snowballed from there. And so basically what I talked to a lot of people from Denver was like, Russ will be fine. It's not like he's a guy that can't coexist with people in the locker room. Now, I think there are some legitimate criticisms from his earlier times in Seattle, things that like Rich Sherman and those guys have, brought up. He obviously, kind of was agitating for a bigger role in that offense and the whole sort of let Russ cook movement thing that was, obviously turned into a failure, right? When he didn't cook.
A game-losing interception.
Maybe can't cook. And then, there were some rumors that I think still to this day are unfounded, but I believe are the source of a lot of the disagreement with his former Seahawks teammates, that he tried to get Pete Carroll fired. And that was and again, I don't think those rumors have ever been proven by anyone, but I do believe that is where a lot of the disagreement between him and his Seahawks teammates come from. Now, I didn't talk to a lot of people from Seattle, but I did talk to one player who was a young player on those Seahawks teams, and he said Russ was great to learn from as a young guy who was kind of wide-eyed about the league, and just in terms of like being real with him about what the real expectations are of not just your day-to-day life and the team, but of being a pro and being someone who's good with his brand and good on social media. And look, Russ is a deeply corny person. He's clearly not going to be for everyone personality-wise, right? Like, there are just some people that are going to
Mr. Unlimited isn't cool
and just be like, come on. Like, it's clear that he is not for everyone, and that he might not be a good fit everywhere. But I just think there's this idea that he's like some kind of diva, or he's uncoachable, or he's a bad teammate. And I don't think necessarily what I learned proved that out to be the case.
I mean, I said this on the Locked On NFL podcast when he came out and he made his statement at the end of the season with the Broncos. I was like, I feel for him. Like, that guy threw 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions in an offense that was very all over the place, that just did not have a lot going for it, on a team that's been in such a transition since he got there. Nathaniel Hackett didn't work. Sean Payton came in. It was a disaster with him. I felt like Russell Wilson kind of got a raw deal in Denver. And this is a guy who, even in Seattle, like, yes, he threw the game-losing interception in against the Patriots in the Super Bowl, and there was certainly drama there. But this was a guy who made 9 Pro Bowls, who was consistently a productive quarterback, and did so without really having like the top receivers in football. Like, he never had the Antonio Brown, the Randy Moss. He had guys that were really solid.
Seattle's wide receivers right now.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like DK Metcalf is like the latest thing, and I was like right before he left. But like, that's where I look at it. I'm like, this guy found a way to make it work and to be productive. And again, at what, 5'10", 5'11", like he's supposed to be a guy that doesn't make it work in the NFL, and yet he's built a career out of it. And I think that, like, I'm with you that, like, when I brought up like the questions of the tensions and the divisiveness that was in Seattle and Denver, I said it was a question and it was something that might cause a drawback, but that's why the Steelers wanted to bring him in. That's why they wanted to talk to him. That's why their meeting was several hours. I think they wanted to comb through what kind of person this is. And listen, Mike Tomlin is one of those guys, and he's a judge of character, and he's able to work with different characters. Also, a guy who's worked with characters. He handled Antonio Brown for 9 years before Antonio Brown was bouncing around from team to team for like 3 seasons, and then was just forced himself out of the NFL. You look at guys like Martavis Bryant, who, was productive for Pittsburgh and then nowhere else. You look at what's happening with George Pickens right now, and how, he went from not blocking in the Colts game to the next week throwing big blocks to help spring, Jalen Warren, and kind of saying like, hey, we're doing those things now. That's one thing that Mike Tomlin's done well. If Russell Wilson's even in that category, and I think that Russell Wilson certainly has some drama about him, but he's nowhere near the Antonio Browns, the people that their divaness and their drama is so much more, can be so much more explosive than what I think that Russell Wilson would bring to the table.
Yeah, and I do think there's like a different bar for a quarterback. Like, I think you can tolerate a different level of like tomfoolery from a wide receiver, right? Like, you can just, like, you just sort of expect that, like, if you have 3 good wide receivers on your team, then one of them's probably a little bit nuts. Like, that's just kind of the way it is. I think there's probably a different bar for quarterbacks where like less of that stuff gets tolerated from that position. But I really don't see that in Russell Wilson. I just see a guy whose maybe personality isn't for everyone, and maybe can rub some people the wrong way, but is not like I've never heard anybody say he's a bad guy. In fact, I heard the opposite, that he's just he's a great guy. Like, people said, like, I love Russ. Like, I love being in the locker room with him. Like, and so not everybody's going to be like that, but I don't think that he's the kind of person where that kind of stuff should be a red flag. Now, it's a fit thing, and like you said, that's one of the reasons you had that big meeting, but it's not necessarily like a no-go thing. I wouldn't think.
I agree with you here. That's why they wanted to have the meeting. Let's say, hey, let's decide for ourselves. And apparently they did. And again, I think the biggest factor as far as why this makes sense, $1.2 million, literally the vet minimum for a quarterback. You got a Super Bowl champion quarterback on your roster, for that kind of money. I think certainly that's part of it. Now, the question is, as far as what does he bring on the field? What does he still have left in the tank? What are some problems that we saw in Denver carrying over? We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet or more wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win the whole thing. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. And then that's on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's talk about the Russell Wilson on the field. We talked about it off the field because I wanted to address what I think has been some of the biggest criticisms and questions about Russell Wilson was the character, the drama, the corniness, that there. And listen, Mr. Unlimited is corny. Like that part of it's corny. Now, yeah, I think that's certainly a funny thing, but that's something you can live with if my guy's throwing 26 touchdowns for the Steelers next year and doing well. And when you look at his touchdown interception ratio, like that's when the Steelers would live with it right now, 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. But I think what a lot of people are pointing out, his middle of the field passing numbers aren't the greatest. And a lot of times he threw behind the line of scrimmage, and people are asking, was that more of the Broncos offense or was that more about Russell Wilson? Your opinion, you look at Russell Wilson right now, what are the biggest deficiencies that either he'll have to eliminate or the Steelers will have to find a way to mask in Arthur Smith's offense?
The first thing that I really think about is, I maybe wouldn't call it a deficiency, but I'll say like it's a potential roadblock. I think when you look at what the Steelers have done this offseason and bringing in Arthur Smith, it sure seems like Kenny Pickett's going to be back. They're bringing in Russell Wilson for literally the veteran minimum, with no commitment to him beyond this year. They're not going to design an offense around Russell Wilson. They're going to run the offense that they hired Arthur Smith to run,
right?
And Russell Wilson's going to run it. That's never really been the case in his career. He's always sort of been kind of the franchise guy, right? Where he was in Seattle, and then obviously with Denver paying what they were paying him, they were going to do everything they could to try to make everything work for Russell Wilson. And like you said, he's this guy with this physical package that like looks like it shouldn't work. There are things he's good at and things he's not good at that are not like most other quarterbacks. And I'm not necessarily sure how it's going to go with him in an offense that is not specifically tailor-made to maximize his strengths and minimize his weaknesses. I'm not saying it's going to be bad. I'm just saying it's kind of an unknown. Like we've never really seen him have to do that. So I think that's the first thing that stands out to me. And then the second thing, you kind of touched on it, is when you look at what Arthur Smith has done in his previous stops in Tennessee and Atlanta, and when you look at what Wilson has done, there's some overlap, right? Like he's a pretty mobile guy. You could call some design quarterback runs with him, like Smith has done with guys like Marcus Mariota. He throws a beautiful deep ball. That's probably his best characteristic. So if you want to talk about an offense that's going to run, and then take their shots, man, I think a guy like George Pickens should be very happy about this signing. I think it probably maximizes his potential and a guy that can really lob some deep balls. But the third kind of part of that, the Smith offenses, has been really a heavy level of utilization in the middle of the field. That's something that Wilson's never been very good at, never really looked comfortable at. His height's an issue. He has a hard time seeing over his offensive linemen. And so his teams have kind of generally not made him do the full like left to right progression that involves the middle of the field because it's tough for him. When he has thrown there, it's been like scramble drills or waggles or, bootlegs, things like that. And so can he do it? I don't really know that anybody has like a yes or no answer to that. It's certainly possible, but we also haven't really seen it either. So I think there are some important question marks here in terms of the scheme fit and the team fit between Wilson and the Steelers that are probably going to be unknown, at least until we get through OTAs and maybe even beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is we need to see how things clash here. But speaking of OTAs and such, Alan, when the Steelers report to OTAs, who's QB1? Because there's some people that think that, hey, Kenny Pickett, this is his system, it's still his team. He's going to have this. Louis Riddick saying, Kenny Pickett's not going to make this easy. And Russell Wilson, there's other people that say, look, Russell Wilson threw 26 touchdowns last year. That's twice as much as Kenny Pickett has thrown in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. Why is this even a question? Where do you stand on where the Steelers will be when they report?
It's a $64 million question right here. I don't know. I feel like this has been reported sort of both ways. I guess you could kind of choose your own adventure based on who you want to believe. I feel like that it was probably promised to Russell Wilson at some point in that 6-hour interview on Friday that he will get the first crack at being the starting quarterback. Otherwise, I don't understand why he would have agreed to sign so quickly with no additional money. It was reported by NFL Network this morning that he was looking for a second year on this deal and wasn't able to find anybody that was willing to offer that. So there was no bidding, right? It was just the teams that were going to offer him this minimum contract. I don't know how you see Pittsburgh as the best fit if they're going to make you compete with the former first-round draft pick when, like, Vegas is clearing house, Minnesota, who's the Jaron Hall? Is that their starting quarterback right now? Like, clearly, those are easier battles to win right now. And like, I mean, I guess, are the Steelers like a little bit closer to maybe being a championship caliber team than those guys are? Sure, but it's not like Russell Wilson's going to be the thing that gets them over the hump either. Like, people were saying like, oh, the Steelers are a quarterback away. Well, like, maybe they're a superstar quarterback away. Sure. Right. If you put a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes on the Steelers, they're absolutely a Super Bowl team. Russell Wilson is not bridging the gap from where they were to that, right. Not on his own, certainly not at this stage in his career. And so if he wasn't promised that, then maybe we'll have a real competition. Maybe it'll be Kenny Pickett. Maybe Mike Tomlin is the greatest salesman in the history of the universe because I don't know what else he could have said to get him to sign, but I guess we don't really know.
We don't know. And I think that's the other thing to acknowledge here is that, like, there's so much up in the air that we are just not sure about right now. Like, we're not going to lie to you and say, like, oh, yeah, it's this, or it's definitely this, it's definitely that. Kenny's definitely starting. Russell's definitely starting. To me, it makes the most sense that, like, Russell Wilson would be the QB1. He's a guy that's literally won a Super Bowl, won several playoff games. He's done it on the biggest stage. Kenny Pickett, was struggling last year before he got injured. And yes, there's people out there. Is it fair that if Kenny Pickett's not, doesn't start for the Steelers again? Certainly no. But you know what? Life ain't fair. The NFL ain't fair. It's a business. That's the life of the NFL. You're here 1 minute, gone the next. And that's not to say Kenny Pickett shouldn't get another chance. You know what? I think that if Kenny Pickett is able to learn under Russell Wilson, and let's say Russell Wilson does, well enough that the Steelers, maybe they win a playoff game, they get to the divisional round next year, and they're like, okay, but we think Kenny's the guy. We're not going to pay Russell Wilson a lot of money, and in free agency, Russell Wilson gets a bag from, like, I don't know, Atlanta, or no, Atlanta's got Kirk Cousins now, but you get my point. Minnesota, another team that wants to just pay ridiculous amounts of money for a veteran quarterback, and the Steelers like, you know what, that's okay. We're going to go with either Kenny Pickett or someone else. Like that, I could see that happening, and then Kenny Pickett being like, all right, I've learned a little bit. I'm coming back. I'm a different quarterback, much like how Mason Rudolph did at the end of this last season, where he played his best football in 6 years of being in the NFL. So, like, I think that's where, if you're the Steelers, like, that your approach is here. And again, I'm not saying that definitely Russell Wilson's the guy, but I'm saying we don't know. And I think that there's so many different angles that this could be approached by the Steelers. And I think that's where it's going to be most interesting down the stretch is if the Steelers do make this a competition, how is this judged? Like, who gets what reps in the preseason? How do things look in training camp? That's going to be a conversation. Like Alan, when they report to OTAs or in mini camp, and we're there in the spring, and we're at the Steelers facility, everyone's going to be looking for the first footage of Russell Wilson throwing a football, and they're like, "That spiral, is that a good enough? That's better than a Kenny spiral." And then Kenny Pickett, oh, his spiral looks tighter. Oh man, maybe I don't know. Is he a lot better? I guarantee you that kind of stuff's coming, and none of that will matter. It will come down to how things work out in training camp, who's running the offense the best, and then when they do preseason, how things are working out there. And to me, Russell Wilson, with his experience, clearly has an edge there. Doesn't mean that Kenny Pickett doesn't have a chance, but there's a clear edge to that experience.
Yeah, I think, and just maybe, for the audience's sake here, because I know you know this, but like a lot of times if there is not a clear-cut like, oh, you should be ahead of me, I should be ahead of you. Sort of the NFL like unofficial locker room protocol is you kind of just go with the veteran guy. If
Yeah.
there's any question about like where a new veteran belongs in the pecking order for a team, and this happens at every position, not just quarterback, like the standard is generally like, okay, we'll let the veteran go. Who was the guy? There was a guy they signed maybe about 2018 or 2019 where it was like very clearly they signed a veteran who was not going to be one of the better players at their position, but it was still like the first snap of OTAs, he was still like the guy out there with the number ones. And and then clearly as things went on, the coaches put their finger on the scale, right? At some point they step in and say, oh no, this one's our guy, you go with the second team, we'll take this guy over here. But there's there's like a sort of unofficial part of the beginning of it where the players kind of decide amongst themselves and try to figure it out. Dante Moncrief is who.
Yes, that's a great one.
And it was like the receivers room was like young Deontay, James Washington, Juju. Those were the guys, but they were younger guys, right? And so the beginning of OTAs, it was sort of like, all right, let the vet go, and then we'll see what happens. And I'm pretty sure that when the training camp rolled around, that it was the younger guys. And I think Moncrief lasted like 4 or 5 weeks into the season before it was cut. So like, just because you take that first rep of OTAs, that doesn't really mean anything, especially when the Steelers have no skin in the game with Russell Wilson. Like if there was a $10 million or $20 million dead cap hit at the end of it, if they had to let him go, it would be different. But I do think, even though I expect him to probably get that chance, it's just a very different situation when the team has no future commitment to you than it has been with him in previous stops. And when we've seen sort of similar things happen with the Steelers over the years, where there's an incumbent or a veteran guy, like usually they have a big dollar sign attached to their name that skews that decision. That's just not happening this time around.
You know what's I think an interesting comparison? Melvin Ingram, when he came to the Steelers and like presumably was said like, oh no, I'll earn my spot, whatever. And Alex Highsmith, when he just held on to that spot, Melvin Ingram was like, get me out of here. I don't want to I don't want to do this anymore. Like I thought I was going to earn the starting spot from this man. And then Alex Highsmith became the guy that is now, the guy across from TJ Watt, who signed a very good deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers and deservedly so. I feel like the Steelers want to avoid that at all costs. They're not lying to Russell. They're being upfront with Russell. And this is to say, I think they were upfront with Melvin Ingram. He just thought he was going to be good enough to beat out Alex Highsmith because he was a second-year player and a third-round pick. And everyone was like, is he going to develop into something? But I think this is different. Kenny Pickett's the first-round pick. He's been around for 2 years. There's hope around the guy. And I think there's also an air about Kenny Pickett that's like, hey, I'm here to prove something. So I think whatever's been said, the Steelers have been very upfront with Russell Wilson. And like you said, it's either he knows that he's getting the first crack at being QB1 and will have a legitimate chance to prove that he is QB1, or like you said, maybe Mike Tomlin's just some great salesman that Russell Wilson's like, yeah, why not? I want to play for Mike Tomlin. And that's why I kind of lean a little bit more to the former in that situation. But who else will the Steelers be adding in free agency? There were a lot of moves made on the first day of tampering on Monday. We'll go over some of those and who's left and who the Steelers should be looking at here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. What's the first thing that you do if you had an extra hour in your day? We all lost an hour with daylight savings time. Thank you very much. But maybe you'd go for a run, read a book, or be there for a friend. But what if you're just being there for yourself? That's where therapy can come into hand, because therapy can help you find what matters most to you so that you can do more of that. I personally benefited from the help of a good therapist in my life who's helped me sort out the most important things that I need to focus on so I can try to balance every single day the way I need to, so I can go forward with a clear head. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp Therapy a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Alan Saunders for SteelersNow.com. All right, Alan, let's go over some of the things. Now, the Steelers did sign a punter from the Texans. I already forgot his name. Johnston.
Cam Johnston.
Cam Johnston. Thank you.
Should be very easy for us Pitt basketball media alumni to remember. Just got to put the T in there. And also, he's Australian and not from Moon Township. But Cam Johnston is the Steelers' new punter. And a 3-year deal for $9 million. So pretty solid commitment to him. 3 times as much as their starting quarterback. That's it. That was kind of that's it. That's the list. They got a punter. Not much else going on the first day.
Right. But that's also kind of typical for the Steelers, right? Like the Steelers aren't a team usually that is going out there bidding big, taking the first guys off the board in most years. Some years they've had to because of certain situations, but in general, the Steelers are a team that kind of waits to see the most expensive guys that go and then go and get them. And then certain guys are off the board now. Like we know certain guys that got re-signed by their own teams. Chris Jones is going to the Chiefs. Lloyd Cushenberry is now going to the Titans. Certain moves have been made. But now, so we've seen those. This is the Tuesday episode. So Tuesday, I expect more of the same, more moves like that to be coming out and to see where they go. Are there any players in particular who didn't get signed on this day or didn't, no reports of their agreements have come out that maybe you're saying like, okay, this is a primary target for a Steelers need that makes a lot of sense?
Yeah, I think the one that the position that stands out to me that has not really been tapped is cornerback.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like center and linebacker, which are other places that the Steelers certainly have needs. Really, I mean, I think every time I saw a text in our Steelers Now group text today, it was just another linebacker getting signed. Like that was they all got signed. I think. I mean, I'm sure there are some left, but it was certainly.
Did Jerome Baker get signed?
No, he did not. And you know what? This is the point I'm going to make. All right, so you're cutting the line here on my thought process because that was the second one. All right, slow down. I'll get to Jerome Baker. All right. Cornerback, I think L'Jarius Sneed is the big name. Like you're talking about, hey, it's the first day, all the big names are going, and not only like L'Jarius Sneed didn't go, Kendall Fuller's still out there, Stephon Gilmore's still out there. I think corner is a place where the big names are sort of still there. Like Sean Murphy-Bunting, who signed an absurd deal for a slot corner.
Yeah, that was a lot of money.
Woo. Chidobe Awuzie went. But I think some of the big names at corner are still there. And since the Steelers haven't been very active, they only have so much cap space. Like they have like, I don't know, $5 million like that they could definitely spend right now. And then probably like another 10 to 15 that like they can sort of spend now and figure it out later. But so how, when we're going into free agency, we don't really know. Are they going to try to make one big move? Are they going to try to split it up into a couple? The fact they haven't really made any, I think, leaves the one big move idea on the table. And for me, if they're going to make one big move, Sneed is the one, right? I mean,
but wouldn't that take a trade since he got tagged, right?
It would take a trade, yeah. And the Chiefs have been reported to be asking for a second-round pick for his rights. I don't know if that's going to stick. I think the Chris Jones signing sort of puts them behind the 8 ball a little bit, where it doesn't really look like the franchise, him playing under the franchise tag, is going to be viable for them. So that should reduce their leverage, I would think, a good bit in terms of the trade market. I threw one out there the other day. It's like, trade Deontay Johnson for him, maybe get him to throw in Sky Moore and see what happens. But I think that's where if you're talking about like a place they could spend a big chunk, I think corner remains like the one place. The other areas I think are really picked over already, but there was 2 names, one at center and one at linebacker, that I kind of picked out early in this process that I thought were sort of Steelers fits, and that's Jerome Baker at linebacker and Brian Allen at center. Both of those guys are guys dealing with injury issues. And a lot of times those guys don't sign right away or don't agree right away because the teams actually want them to fly in and take an in-person physical.
Medicals, yeah.
And so it, like, Jerome Baker was released by the Dolphins just a week ago with a failed physical designation. Like, he's not going to pass a physical in a week. The Steelers, somebody who signs him is going to have to know what they're getting into. Brian Allen, significant injury history as the center of the Los Angeles Rams. I think he missed 2 of the last 3 or 4 years with major injuries. And so that's a guy that teams are going to want to look at in person before they commit to. So if you're thinking about some guys and you're like, why isn't this guy gone? If it's a player with an injury history or a current injury issue, they're probably going to come in. If you remember, Cole Holcomb's deal last year got reported, and then it was like a week before they made it official because that was the delay in that process. And so sometimes it does get reported early, but sometimes teams don't even want to commit to anything until they get their eyes on them. So I think someone like Baker or Brian Allen are both fits at those positions that could still be on the board for the Steelers.
Now let's take a look at Brian Allen for a second, because I think this is interesting. If they sign a Brian Allen at center with his injury history and everything there, does that neutralize any plan? Does that make drafting a center in the first 2 rounds something that you wouldn't do? Would you sign a veteran and then would draft a guy high at that same position right after, at a position where you know those guys they either start or they're benched?
No, I think you would still, and the Steelers do this all the time, right? Signed Mitch, drafted Kenny Pickett, signed Mark Barron, traded up to get Devin Bush, same year, right? And they do this all the time where they kind of hedge themselves ahead of time with a free agent. I think Brian Allen's a good starter, but I think his injury history sort of has him angling towards like a 1-year prove it kind of deal anyway, right? Where if he could come in and be good, he's still in his 20s, like he could have one more big contract left in him if he can show that he can be healthy and play a full season. I don't think it eliminate drafting a center. I also think, look, I mean, Jackson Powers-Johnson hasn't been playing center that long. Graham Barton from Duke is a guy who's being talked about as a center in this class, but hasn't played there since his freshman year back in 2000. So, like, those guys are sort of tough fits if you're drafting them and trying to plug them in as day one starters. Zach Frazier, I think, is probably pretty experienced and would be better at that. But I just think it frees them up to, one, not have to draft a center if the board just falls in a way that it's inconvenient to do it, or you just think, oh my God, these tackles and these corners are too good, I can't get away from them. You don't have to. And the other thing is it lets you draft a center and then not have to play him if you don't think he's ready in week 1.
Well, hopefully, as we record this at 11:20 p.m. Eastern time Monday night, nothing happens in the next 5 minutes that makes all of what we just said null and void, like what happened with Russell Wilson. Also, if you all missed it, I did a full episode with Jenna Harner that basically talked about the potential of signing Russell Wilson, as well as a lot of the free agency questions. And then, like, literally a half hour after I posted that, the news came out, and then I did a whole emergency podcast episode. So thank you for bearing with us as we dealt with that, as I was also packing to get to DC for the ACC tournament. And here I am now in DC doing that. But we will keep you up to date all week long, as will Alan Saunders at SteelersNow.com. Alan, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and anything else you got coming up Steelers Now that people need to look out for.
@Saunders_PGH, PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com, sites account, all kinds of good stuff there. Just wall to wall with all the free agent news. And we have a story we're working on that got pushed back by this Russell Wilson news. Also, doing a little bit of a deep dive, like 1 year later, into Omar Khan's first free agency and kind of going back and reevaluating how things have gone with the guys that he was signing this time last year. Obviously, one of them, Patrick Peterson, already released. Some of them worked out a little bit better. So be on the lookout for that today or tomorrow at SteelersNow.com.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan. And thank you all for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all the daily Monday through Friday episodes on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter. Check out here tomorrow. More tomorrow. We'll be talking more about your Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see what other free agency moves they've made right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.